excited today for today's topic to be able to spend time with Kevin Sweeney, who's not just a friend but family with the V3 movement. Kevin and his wife Christine are licensed therapists. They've given their lives to create Imagine Church in Honolulu. It's a place that embraces the complexities of life, and they're unwilling to offer black and white answers in a world that's filled with color. And so Imagine is very welcoming of all people, and they see imagination as the key to the future. He's got a master's degree in theology and intercultural studies, and he's fascinated with committed to creating environments for creativity, social healing, communal cohesiveness, and personal transformation. So we're really excited to have him really sharing his insights on this topic. And of course, we have Dan White Jr., full-time consultant and coach with the V3 movement, church planting movement. We're super pumped to be having him as a co-host for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you by the V3 movement. We have a learning cohort that walks with church planters throughout the year to really unpack and explore the core competencies around grounded missional practices. And so if you or someone you know is interested in becoming a church planter, or you're looking for tools for how you can really build out a missional and a movemental approach to church planting, we would encourage you to look us up on the app. There is the V3 Movement app, and you can register or apply or learn more about the V3 learning cohort through that means. And so we're glad that this webinar is brought to you by the V3 Movement learning cohort. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I am Lori Ruffin, and I'm glad to be with you, operations manager with the V3 Movement and founder of the COO team, building strategies and systems for scaling. So I guess with all of that, let's jump in. We've got such a weighty topic. A lot of people have been interested. We've been getting messages for the last several weeks about this topic. And so with that, I'll hand it over to you, Kevin and Dan.
Thanks, Lori. Really appreciate it.
Oh, I forgot one more thing. If you're joining, there's going to be things that are light bulb moments for you. Some things will be ahas and other things will evoke questions. So I want to invite everyone to, if you have a question, enter it into the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. In Zoom, you can answer any questions, ask any questions, and we'll field those at the end of today's webinar. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Kevin. Kevin's calling in from Hawaii. I'm calling in from New York, two other ends of the spectrum of the U.S. And I'm really grateful we get to talk about this today. Kevin, I've been a pastor. I just hit my 21-year mark of being a local church pastor, and pain has been a significant part of my journey. And I really wanted to just open up and ask you why we're talking about processing pain. Why processing pain?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, always good to be with you.
Yeah.
I love getting a chance to talk to you. And, sometimes I feel bad in these situations because I don't know your weather situation or others, but if you can see out the window, it's the middle of winter. It's 9 a.m. in Honolulu, and I think it's probably like 80 degrees outside right now. So the pain, but the reason that's important is because, a lot of people make jokes about being in Hawaii and obviously it being a beautiful place, but the universal threads of the unique kinds of suffering, pain, struggles, wounds that pastors and leaders go through is everywhere. No matter what. The flavor is different, the texture is different depending on every context, but the unique kind of journey we go on as pastors is the same, the things we deal with. So, I mean, for me, I think besides my own personal experience, why talking about this is one of the most natural things I do with leaders and with pastors, it's like it always just seems to happen so organically, is one, I believe so much in the work, the ministry, the creativity, the constant pouring out and giving of our life that we do as pastors. So when I
Yeah.
see people pastoring, I believe in the work so much.
Yes.
And then two, why processing pain is so important is too many pastors are losing all of their joy along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Too many pastors are being weighed down by burdens that seemingly for so many people make it, if they're honest with themselves, virtually impossible, especially during some seasons, to feel the same sense of joy, to experience their own deep sense of freedom that I know they're so passionate about leading others into.
Yeah.
And so when I see that, I'm like, I want for you what you want for everybody else.
Right. Yes.
I want you to go even deeper into the very river that you're so faithfully and so courageously, with so much sacrifice involved, trying to lead other people towards. And that, we're in the 7th year of Imagine. So
Yeah.
we did 6 full years. We're in the 7th year. We started when my wife and I were 28. And I think within the first year and a half or so, one of the biggest surprises for me as I was reflecting on my own experience and thinking about sort of the universal experience of pastors is, man, this is a really hard thing to do and maintain joy.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
was like, that's a fascinating thing. And it's a troubling thing to think about, the very people who are trying to draw other people into the life of Christ. When you think about what we go through, it's actually one of the hardest vocations to actually be grounded in that, experience that, and end up as people who are filled with joy along the way.
Yes.
And I think, as a whole, I think despite how difficult it is, there's a way for all of us to preach and to embody the gospel without losing our own souls along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah. And yeah.
keep going. Well, you keep pointing out joy as something that seems to be a cost that kind of is incurred, the loss of joy. Why is that loss of joy connected to the vocational work of pastoring? Where do you see the connection? Why is that happening?
There's a unique kind of suffering. There's unique kinds of wounds. There's a unique experience that pastors have in
Yes.
this world. You really take some of the hardest elements of some of the hardest things you can do, and a pastor, they all converge in a pastor experiences, like all of them.
Yes. Yes.
The vulnerability of an artist to put their work out there, we have that.
Yes.
The struggle of a small business owner to, grind and have grit and make it work and begin something, we have that.
Yes.
The emotional and psychological complexity of, like, I'm not a licensed therapist, but my wife is, of a therapist or a social worker, or like, it's not the same, but we have that too.
Yes.
So like, you take the hardest parts of some of the hardest jobs there are, and we experience all of those in this like inextricably linked and interconnected way.
Yes.
So like, we literally embrace, like, unbeknownst to us when we start.
Right. Right.
Right. I remember I had he was a pastor and he's a professor, say to me when we were first starting Imagine, he's like, Kevin, I'm almost scared for you and what you're going to go through. And at 28, I'm like, what do you mean, man? Like, this is all good. And now I'm obviously 6 years in, I look back and I know exactly what he's referring to, because I feel like that about young people I care about.
Yes.
And because of that, like, because of the convergence of all of those things,
Right.
there's just there's a constant squeezing. There's pressure we feel people don't understand. There's wounds we experience that most people will never understand. So I think going through all of those things from very early on in my journey as a pastor, I knew this. I'm like, if pastors don't learn the art of letting go, don't learn the art of acceptance, and don't learn how to forgive, this will kill them.
Yes. Yes.
It will destroy us. I'm like, I over and over, this one phrase was always with me when I was beginning. I'm like, there's so many things as a pastor, you either die to that thing or that thing will kill you.
Yes.
And that's not the same thing.
Right.
One is a relinquishing and a letting go, which creates more spaciousness in you. The other one is a sort of squeezing and wrestling you to the ground and shutting down the parts of you that God is actually inviting us to open up.
Yeah.
So I just think like the joy and the struggles is, man, all of that together, I understand why burnout is so high, why it's so easy to get resentful, why we carry burdens for so long, because this truly is one of the hardest things like I've ever seen people do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I really believe that.
Yeah. So this leads to a question I have is how do you actually process pain? Are there some concrete ways to step into this?
Yeah.
Ministry.
Yeah. One, I think something I've seen is a lot of pastors are very good at reading the Bible, but they're not always as good at reading their own life.
Wait, say that
Or
again?
listen. Like a lot of pastors are, they're good at reading the Bible. We all kind of have to do that to some degree. So a lot of pastors are good at reading the Bible, but they're not as good about reading their own life and listening to their own life and what's happening. That for me was always central. And that was the beginning of my own journey, not growing up in the church, was a radical sense of self-awareness was the beginning point of my journey towards God.
Yes.
So that always felt I always thought everybody was like that. But when I first went to a Bible college when I was like 20, and I went through this like spiritual formation class, and we went through this whole class and they never once talked about self-awareness. And I just kind of laughed to myself and thought, how is anybody here ever going to allow God to transform that which they are unaware needs to be transformed?
Right.
You can't, as much as I love all my Pentecostal friends and everybody raising their hands, like that's all good to me, but you can't worship your way in the sense of just getting pumped up out of the wounds you carry.
Yes.
It's a different journey. It's a different experience.
Yes.
And so with that said, and this is like, these 4 words I'm going to give you, which is like the heart of the process I would give to anybody who's facing and dealing with the pain, suffering, wounds of pastoring, which also tend to open up the pains and wounds and illusions from our past as well.
Yes.
Right? We're not just dealing with the wounds of that person left and that was really hurtful. It's that person left and that's actually triggering and opening up. And why is it so hard for me? What happens to me when people leave? What does that, do I have those, you know what I'm saying? So
yes.
There's a connection there. But there's this process I walk groups through whenever we talk about forgiveness and letting go. And it's this 4-step process of like finding, facing, feeling, and forgiving. And I always sort of add this, that like the same inner mechanics that are required for forgiving a person are the same inner mechanics that are required for accepting and letting go of expectations or circumstances. Because it's the same dynamic. Sometimes we have to forgive people because they wounded us. Sometimes we have to forgive the situation we're in or accept where we are, because it's like, oh, this is not where I thought I should be. And I'm either going to try to cram what is into the way I thought it should be, or I have to do some work of acceptance. And this is where things are. I have to let go of the way I thought things were supposed to be and allow God to create a new future. And to me, the same process of forgiving people and accepting of circumstances is the same dynamics. And both of those things can keep you stuck forever.
So explain to me finding.
Yeah, I have like one question attached. And like, by the way, I don't know who will listen into this, but this short thing I'm going to say in like 3 minutes is an hour and a half thing I do with groups. Yeah. I just say that because what we do in Malibu, like for the retreat my wife and I are leading, is genuinely me giving to people. There is a way to move through this. And you can see the process. You can see the mechanics of it. It doesn't mean everyone has to do that on their own, but you can see the mechanics of it. And so finding is a simple question of like, what do I have to discover?
Okay.
That's just self-awareness. So somebody's bitter, somebody's frustrated, somebody's angry about something. You're feeling the anxiety of, you're in a moment as a pastor and you're frustrated or whatever it is. So it's like, what do I have to discover? That's just simply beginning the journey of self-awareness. The facing, it's a very logical, a very simple movemental journey. The second one facing is, okay, what do I have to discover? I'm looking now. So the second one facing is, what do I have to see?
Mm.
If I go on that journey and I take the time, which it does require time and intentionality, it doesn't, transformation doesn't just happen.
Right.
Growing old is not the same thing as growing up.
Yes. Yes.
You know what I mean? So the facing part, what do I have to see? If I go on that journey, the things I see are really hard to see.
Yeah.
They're really hard. That's the seeing and the naming process is the same thing. So I have to name that. Man, I gave 1.5 years of my life to this person. They were in my home. They slept at my house. They knew my kids. They sat around the table. And all of
Yeah.
a sudden, because of a misunderstanding or a small thing that for them became a massive thing, they just left.
Left. Yes.
And I thought we were going to build this for the next 5 years together.
Yes.
And so that's one example of, what do I have to see? Dude, that really hurt me. That
Yeah.
was really hard for me to watch them leave. So the facing, what do I have to see, is the naming of, man, that really hurt, or they left and didn't say anything. And how do I process, how do I grieve that with zero closure from their end? And I have
Yeah.
to I have to deal with the ambiguity of what happened, all that stuff. And
Right. Right.
so yeah, the seeing is, there is this thing in us, what someone calls like this primordial avoidance. It's the lack of the courage or the ability to see what's there, and it's the turning away. And
Yeah.
this one writer says it's that turning away, therein lies all the suffering of humanity, is that first turning away from what you have to see to begin the process of integration.
Yes. That's good.
And so you gotta see it. It's just, name it for what it is. That's the thing. I
Yeah.
thought, or as a pastor, I thought we would be here at year 3, and we're not.
Yeah.
I thought we would have this going on. I thought there would be this many people. I thought the leadership team would be here, and you're not. What do I have to see? Maybe it's not forgiving a person, but I have to accept this is not where I thought we would be.
Yes.
And a
Yeah.
part of me feels guilty, a part of me might feel shame for that. A part of me feels like I'm supposed to be further, whatever that means. And if I want to open up a space in me for new life and resurrection, I have to accept that's not where we are.
Right.
Can I
Right.
let go of where I thought we were supposed to be and accept this? That's really hard sometimes.
Yes.
That is pain. That's its own form of grieving. You're dying to the way you thought things were supposed to be.
Yes. That's good.
So yeah, facing the feeling part after that, it's like, what do I have to see? The feeling part is, in that moment, what do I have to accept? Or like, what do I have, when you're feeling something, what do I have to accept? So it's like, you see something. I draw like these amazing stick figures when I do this long talk on this. But the feeling is like, imagine you saw something and now you're taking it into your hands and you're feeling it into your chest until it has no more power anymore.
Yes.
What do I have to accept? The church isn't where I thought it would be at this point. A part of my ego wants to be embarrassed. A part of me feels humiliated. If I'm feeling these things, what do I have to accept? I think these people are judging me. I think the people who sent me out might be disappointed in me. It's like all these things we're fearful of. I have to take all that in and feel it. Yes, like a part of me does feel like that. Or the forgiveness, I have to feel that loss. I have to feel that betrayal. I have to feel all of that. And to me, there's this really fascinating dynamic of, you hold that long enough in the presence of God until it finally has no more power over you and only the power of God's left. And you discover that miracle of, I'm still here.
Yes. Yes.
It didn't kill me. Like, there's so much to say about that, but the
Yeah.
feeling, the accepting.
You gave me some counsel. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. For me, I have a hard time being attuned to my body and to my feelings. And so I was going through a season where someone I had deeply loved, and a little bit of what you shared a few minutes ago, they, in my home, and I spent time with them, and I mean, I had been to the bottom of the well in their life with them, and then suddenly they had, abandoned over a small offense, and I carried that pain in my body, and I didn't know how to feel it and release it. And one of the counsel you gave to me was to write their name on a piece of paper. And I think for you, you sat on a cliff and you kind of
Yep.
released it over a cliff. But for me, I had to burn it around a bonfire.
But
And
that's what I did. I was on a cliff, you're right, and I burned it. It was
yeah.
double. It's that bad.
So, I mean, I wish I was on a beautiful cliff like you were, but for me, I needed to actually feel, for me to move out of just being the rumination of what's happening in my head. I actually had to have a physical embodied practice for me to feel it, because
Absolutely.
it lived in my body and tortured me. And that practice actually helped me come to, I think it was actually the first time I openly wept over that person.
Mm.
And so I know that for some people, feeling, especially with a pastor, when you don't have a lot of time to stop, you feel like you got to keep moving, and you have to take those hits and those injuries and put them under your coat and just keep walking forward. And so having a sense that it's okay and probably vital to feel. And so for me, that was a really helpful practice that you'd give me a few years back.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, that's the power of rituals, is rituals have the ability to align your head, your heart, and your body together.
Yeah,
Processing pain doesn't happen in your mind.
right.
Thinking about it does. You can think about your pain forever, but
Yeah,
the ability, like the finding, facing, feeling, that's a gut level, body, heart, mind. It's all of those things. So a ritual, like, I had a picture of this guy someone drew when we were still cool, essentially, and it was just laying around. And this process of finding, facing, feeling, forgiving, I'm familiar enough internally, like with small things, I can do it in a snap, like mid conversations. I just know how to do it. But because that was one of the biggest wounds I ever took as an adult, I was like, man, for me to really release this, I need that ritualized moment to light it on fire, watch the name, feel everything, weep over it. And it's only in the feeling of things all the way through, which is the full death comes, where new life and resurrection can happen.
yes, yes,
And when it comes to the time for pastors, the deep transformation we need to continue to keep doing this with joy, it doesn't come from trying harder, it comes from being loved better.
yes. Okay, explain that to me.
Because what is our impulse? Like, you and I are fives. We're really unlikely candidates based on personality to do what we do on one level.
Yes.
Like, we're not all, it's always like one, not to, like, it's always like ones, threes, eights, maybe some sevens, like high energy. They're like, go, church. Yep. Company. Sure. Let's keep,
Yes.
And you need those people. They're great. I could use more to imagine. We have way too many fours, fives, and nines. And imagine we need some go-getters. But there's just this, and that's why there's no judgment and it's not malice, but there's this unconscious impulse when we're not listening to our life. Like I said, like, you feel bad about something deep down, and instead of going into it, finding it, facing it, feeling it, what do? Let's start something new.
Right.
What's the next sermon series?
Yeah.
Let's do the next campaign for the poor in the neighborhood. And those things objectively in and of themselves are good and produce fruit, but it's always fascinated me, that dynamic of how many good things are actually born out of our ego's need to avoid the suffering that's within us.
Oh man, yeah.
So you're doing good things, but you're losing yourself along the way.
Yes.
And nobody knows it, and you don't know it until it's usually too late.
Yeah.
So if there's some fresh season of some wounds or something happened, if I have a 3-hour afternoon, which I have 2 small kids, that usually wouldn't happen, but let's say if I have a 2-hour window where it's like, this is my work time, like this is when I'm creating, seeing people, communicating, or whatever, I might just sit. I live like you can see out the window, it's like I'm on the 37th floor of our building. I might sit in that room and just look out the window for 2 hours and go through this process in the presence of God of finding, facing, feeling, and just weep a little bit. And I'm like, that's the most important work I could do right now.
Right.
It's really hard because when you're not producing and there's no tangible
Yes.
results, the ego's like, we're not doing anything. We should be doing more. I'm like, no, if I'm not willing, if I truly believe that this joy I want other people to experience is for me, and I want to be free, and I want to know how good this is for myself, then in an indirect way, even as a pastor, the most important thing I can do is grieve over that, is do that letting go, is refuse to just produce more. Because my ability to do that now affects my joy, my presence as a husband, my presence as a dad, and my presence as a pastor 6 years from now.
Yes, yes.
And we have to be willing to stop. Like, that's a thing as a pastor. It's really hard to just stop and listen to your life. And yet without that, that's where you can't find anything unless you're taking the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, I could keep going, but yeah.
Talk about forgiving. Your last.
The forgiving part is, forgiving, the Greek word aphieme, which means like to send away. The issue is people want to send things away before they've actually faced it and felt the fullness of it. And you can't do that. Like, I want to get rid of this. I want to stop feeling this, but they haven't actually faced it yet. They haven't named it yet. They haven't felt the fullness of taking it in. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm 35. So when I was like 20, a friend of mine, I was in LA at the time, who was in Hawaii. He called me up, and for whatever the reasons were, there was some childhood trauma coming up for him, some serious stuff. And he's like, Kev, I want to call you because my Bible college friends just like give me like biblical scriptures to read, and it's not really helping. And he's like, I know you'll just listen. Then after a while, because of what he went through was so traumatic, he was angry. The anger was coming up, the non-acceptance of it, the why did this happen? But he said to me, like, really strongly, he's like, Kevin, I wish God would just deal with this. Right? And just like immediately I responded, I won't say his name, but I'm like, or why don't, instead of saying, why doesn't God deal with this? Why don't you deal with this and invite God into that space? And what I knew right there was he wants to forgive it and be freed from it. He doesn't want to face it and feel it though. That just isn't how the full healing of processing pain works.
Yes.
And so, yeah, the forgiving part, like, you can only send something away once it's exhausted its power by taking it into yourself fully. Because in the end, there's nothing left. You're like, now I can set this aside. Because it got nothing left for me.
Yes. Yes.
So the last part's like, the question is, what do I need to let go of? I thought things were supposed to go like this in the church. They're not. Yeah. We're not there. Year 5 isn't where you thought. It's okay. Yeah. Let go of that. You weep over it, grieve, feel it all. You're still here. Can we still can we allow God to create more life? Yeah. Okay, now we can send this away. What do I have to let go of? The way I thought everything was supposed to be. I thought if I served people with all my heart, they would never hurt me. That's not how this is working.
Right.
Ever. I have to let go of that. So yeah, that's like that 4-step thing is, to me, the best of like perennial wisdom, biblical wisdom, contemporary like psychology, psychoanalysis, running through the grid of a lot of pain, suffering in my life that I've refused to ignore, and I felt it all along the way. So I'm like, I want to say that's like my life's work, which is silly because I'm 35, but I'm like, I have sat by myself on so many cliffs, so many edges of things, and have done that just like sort of intuitively for so long that I'm like, it's through my tears that like, that's how I offer that to people, because I just know it so deeply. And every single time I've done that, I've come out more free.
Yes.
Every time I've done that, my life's been more spacious on the other side.
Kevin, this is this is profound stuff for me in real time, just listening to this. And the as I'm listening through the process, I'm hearing it through my own journey and my own story. And you said earlier, which in some sense got under my skin for a second, but it's good, buddy. You know, 2 years ago I had a significant, well, 3 years ago, but it took a full year to really discover something. I hadn't been dealing with pain, and it was too late. I had ignored it. I was mind over matter kind of person. Like I just ignored the hurts and the rejection and abandonment and insults, and my body gave out on me. At first, I just thought it was a physical deal, but I realized it was connected deeply to my emotional inner world, and a lot of it was because I didn't walk through a process like this. And I prematurely let go of the pains that I carried. I just prematurely let them go because I just had to keep working, and I had to be stable when everybody else around me seemed unstable. And so I just find what you're talking about right now, Kevin, is profound. And for as simple as it is, I know how deep and rich it is. So this is really, really good. I'm so grateful for this, Kevin.
Thanks,
Thank
man.
you.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying
And I know I know people don't know you on this webinar, but you embody this practice. You live this incarnationally, and this is theology and practice for you. And so I'm really grateful for how you've made this accessible.
yeah.
The last question I have is, how is contemplation in spiritual formation connected to this? Like, are they connected? How does it associate with this? Because I know contemplation and mindfulness and stillness are hot deals. You know, it's but I want to know how like these things actually come together in real time.
Yeah, I always think it's funny with like mindfulness or contemplation, or now that like a lot of evangelical types are like, whoa, we just heard about this new guy, Richard Rohr. Like, have you heard of him? You know? And I always joke around because I'm like, I joke around with stuff like that because it's like, for me, that type of stuff is like knowing the band before it's cool.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, I love Richard Rohr before anybody knew about him. That's because when I read his first book when I was like 20-ish, or not his first book, but the first book I read, Everything Belongs, it was the first thing that ever like named my journey because of the unique journey I had when I was young. On my own, no guides, no youth group, just encountering the presence of God through my own exploration, which I came to see as present in the person of Jesus. But with contemplation, practices, silence, solitude, how does that connect with processing pain? That process of, feeling and forgiving, it's tough. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's painful, man. Like that's tears, and it seems to express itself through tears when you actually do the full work of it. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about genuinely facing and feeling, whether it's contemporary wounds or the ones that open up things from the past, like the deepest, most painful things you'll ever feel. So I don't take it lightly at all.
Yeah.
I think there's a process to it, but I know walking that process is the hardest thing. You will not surrender until you deeply know and trust there's something that you can surrender to. You will not relinquish control until you genuinely not believe, but trust in your body and your heart that there is somebody worthy to surrender and let go of control to, and there's genuinely going to be more life, resurrection on the other side.
Okay.
That trust, that faith, that relational reality of faith comes primarily from actual union, actual connection, actual knowing for yourself of God.
Yes.
It does not come from dogma and beliefs. If people here are Orthodox Christians, we have a history of beliefs. That's fantastic. I'm with all that, but your belief in God will not be is not going to heal you.
Yeah.
You believing in God won't heal you. You knowing love and grace for yourself is what will
Yes.
be a part of the healing. And Saint Catherine of Siena says, I cannot lose anything in the place of the abundance I have found in God. So that's the thing, is when we're talking about processing pain, we're talking about loss, we're talking about betrayal, we're talking about all these things. If there's not a greater source that's more powerful than that pain, we're never going to process it.
Right.
Because unconsciously, we operate like pain and failure is death, when it's not. It's just pain.
Yeah.
Like, that thing's not going to kill you. It's just going to hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
That thing is not going to end you. It's just going to be really hard. And the more and more I live in that deep sense of union and connection with the presence of God, not my beliefs in God, with the presence of God, it just becomes this, this thing happened and it's painful, or this person said this about you. I have to deal with like some of that out here, like this criticism, and they said this about Imagine. And when you go through that process enough and you trust God deep enough, the response is always some form of like, okay, but like, what is that? Yeah, I have to do a 10-second process to forgive that person for making that little kind of comment, or a deeper one if somebody hurt me. But I know in my heart, in the end, like, that doesn't say anything or take away anything from who I am
Yes.
in this great witnessing presence, loving, affirmative presence of God. And my ability to accept and embrace pain, not enjoy it, but accept it as a part of my life, is defined by my ability of trusting so deeply in the
Yes.
relational presence of God. Like, nothing has killed me.
Yes.
Every wound I have can become a healed scar in the presence of love.
Yes. Yes.
There's nothing I've ever dealt with that's more powerful than the love I experience in that now comes through silence, solitude, practices. Do I
Yeah.
know grace for myself? How real is this for me? So
Yeah.
it's like this, that's why the mystic, I always tell people the mystic is the most dangerous person in the world, and by mystic, I just mean somebody who knows God.
Yes.
The mystic is the most dangerous person in the world, or to institutions, because the mystic keeps saying, there's nothing you can offer me that I have not already been given freely, or there's nothing you can take away from me that means anything with who I am.
Yes.
It might hurt, but I'm going to release that and I'm going to be good. You know what
Yes.
I'm saying? So it's like, if without that process, and this is like at the Malibu thing, those are like two of my main sessions, is the finding facing, like an hour and a half version of that,
Yeah.
or then the just the contemplation, the connection practices. I'm like, without those two,
Yes.
I would encourage people to take a 3-year hiatus and just practice being in the
Yeah.
presence of God, because this is going to crush you. And I don't want that for people. I want people in 5 years as pastors, I'm like, do you have more joy than you had 5 years ago? Are you more free than you were 5 years ago? Because if not, find something else to do. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
No one, we don't need any more like crushed pastors, and it's hard, but like, I want people who know this. That's how deeply I care about pastors doing this work.
Friend, this was so good, Kevin. I wish you could gather everybody up for a cup of coffee right now.
Dang, it's just 9:45 a.m. where I'm at too. I'm so pumped up for the day. Good.
Well, we're going to transition a little bit and take questions from those that are listening in right now, and Lori is taking those questions. Is going to ask those of you right now.
Yes, Kevin, thanks so much. This was so good. One of the questions, we have someone who would love for you to just repeat that phrase about loved more versus trying harder. Can you just maybe unpack that a little bit further?
Well, I think the quote I've used before is something, it's really like, we don't change, or change doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from being loved better.
Mm.
So in those moments of 4 layers down in our life that we don't always pay attention to closely, there's a wound there, there's a hurt. I feel like I'm not living up to expectations. I think people are disappointed, or that person's mad at me, or whatever it is. And when we start to feel some of that discomfort, there's an unconscious impulse to like overcome it through building more, trying harder. That's what a lot of leaders know how to do, right? People know how to grind. A lot of people know how to grind. They don't know how to receive grace as well. So I'm like, what's really going to heal us? Me trying to build more to somehow overcompensate for or hide myself from that pain, or me going into the pain and sitting with it and be like, why do I feel like this? Now that's the facing the feeling part. Why do I feel like this? Well, because I feel like I should be doing more. Well, why do you feel like this? Is like internal? Why do you feel like that? Well, because Dan White's my cohort leader, and he said by year 3 I should have 2 missional communities, and I only have 1. It's like there's some sort of, I'm not living up to like expectations we've internalized along the way that aren't even there from God. I'm like, or instead of doing more, you go into that, feel what you're feeling, face what are some of your fears, insecurities, you're not living up to things. And if you can allow love to meet you there, if you can extend that darkness into the light, all different metaphors for letting yourself be loved there, and I'm freed from that and it loses its power over me, I don't have to compulsively go do more than I'm supposed to do, which is one of the things that's killing us.
Yeah, that's really good. And you also mentioned the idea of reluctance to surrender until we know that we genuinely know that there's someone for us to surrender to. What do you say for someone who finds themselves in a dilemma where they have the theological background, know the scripture, but don't actually know that level of trust of God? Like, I think that's a hard reality to come to. How do you recommend people to navigate that?
Well, I think for pastors need to know there's a difference between knowing information about the Bible and knowing God.
Mm,
It's not the same thing. Like, it's so clear to me on that. And it's like even people like in times of pain and suffering and they turn to the scriptures, like I don't personally do that because I've just my journey was more like before the Bible I met God.
mm,
So I'm like the information in the Bible, while the words living and active, inspired and all that good stuff, but the Bible's not God. So if you go read a scripture of the psalmist crying out to God and then receiving some sort of comfort, that can help you trust that God's there, but that in and of itself is not an experience of God.
mm.
And so like people, that's one of the things is like the practice of contemplation and practices. It's you can get an MDiv and not know how to forgive people. You can get an MDiv and have no idea how to experience grace. You can get an MDiv and never be given the right practices that don't guarantee but help create the best environment for actual encounter with God. So for me, the learning the art of actually experiencing God for yourself is at the heart of all of this, because the foundation of our faith is not a set of beliefs we have in Jesus. It's an actual encounter and knowing of the resurrected Christ for ourselves. So I think just making that distinction for people is good because they start to see the difference. It's like, okay, the Bible's obviously helpful, huge part of our journey, and no one's saying it's not. But this process of union, knowing, experience, there's connected, but there's a distinction there. So just knowing that already gives people a kind of a clarity on the fact that there is a different path.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for bringing clarity to that. And we also have a question about joy. Can you define it for us and maybe name concrete practices for how to cultivate it?
Well, I think joy, like I think there's a funny thing about the mystics throughout history, like the contemplatives, the people who really know God, and they sort of come out of their experience and they're not writing a theological treatise. They're just people who have this deep sense of inner spaciousness and they're like, everything's okay. You know what I mean? It's not like they're not going to write a theology book. They're like, we're actually fine here. All that pressure you feel to like be more than you're supposed to be, that's not even a thing from God. That's cultural, it's family systems, that's our own things or whatever. And So one, joy is to me just like this deep experience of like there's this foundational okayness and goodness to life. That it's a cliche, but it's true, that isn't based on circumstances. Those people left, that's hard, but I ain't got nothing to say about this. It doesn't change that. You know, those people, you know, this guy doesn't said this about your teaching. I'm like, I can live with that, because what I have over here is like, it can't be touched by that. Like in Colossians 3:8, please correct me, anybody out there, if they know if this is the wrong reference. It very well might be anytime I say that. But the whole, when Paul says I'm hidden with Christ in God, it means there's this thing I have, this space that's opened up between me and God that is the deep current running beneath my life that no one can ever touch or get to. So joy is this thing deep within that's like, we're just okay and I'm fine here. Even this one poet, Rumi, says about his relationship with God, he says, you dance inside my chest where no one sees you. And I have that up in the wall in my apartment. And I'm like, no one can touch that. So joy is that thing deep within of being face to face with God, and where you experience the same affirming of the goodness over you that he affirmed over the goodness of creation from the beginning.
Mm.
So joy is, it's not something that can be cultivated in a superficial way. It's the fruit of deep knowing and deeply being known.
That's
So
good. Joy
yeah,
as a byproduct, not as another thing
absolutely.
to create or manufacture, but
Exactly. Which is, yeah.
a byproduct.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned just these layers that we have from culture. How do we gain awareness? You mentioned the importance of self-awareness, and like how do we begin to know what we don't know is affecting us and superimposing these expectations that actually don't come from God, but that come from other places? How do we even realize that we're operating in that way? And then to glue to that, there's a question here that says, doesn't church planting culture pander to egocentrism? And so, you know, if you can maybe address those themes, how do we peel back the layers and then address the surrounding culture?
Yeah, self-awareness is a unique thing because it's like the mystery of like sort of consciousness itself. It's like, why do some people wake up, like in our congregations, in our communities, people are having the same experiences, doing the same practices at the same things, and one person starts to wake up, their life gets bigger, they're more and more like Christ, we celebrate that. And the other person is like, returns to the old thing after you thought they were about to make a big leap. I don't know, that there's a mystery there and a deep, I think as a pastor, a lot of our peace in light of everything we're talking about comes from learning how to let people be. I don't have control over either one of those things. I'm pouring myself out and surrendering all those outcomes. So self-awareness is, you can teach people concepts of it. You know, you can practice, like it begins with this third person. I'm outside of myself, watching myself, thinking about what I'm doing. Then you think about why I'm doing what I'm doing. Then you think about why I'm really doing why I'm doing what I'm doing. There's like the thing behind the thing, behind the thing, behind the thing. And I mean, you can teach people it, but it's just, there's a mysterious, like people have to wake up to it and see it on their own. And also, in terms of seeing the truth of ourselves and the core lies and narratives we believe, there's tools like the Enneagram that are super helpful for that. Because the core lies I believe as a 5 compared to like my wife as a 2 are very different. So the uncommunicated, invisible expectations and pressure my ego might feel is very different from hers because of whatever those reasons are. And also, that's why people go see therapists. That's why people go to spiritual direction, because of how defense mechanisms work, human beings are so highly invested in not seeing the truth of who we are. Because facing what's there is very humiliating. It's like, did I really do that because I thought freaking Tom was gonna think I was cool? I don't even like Tom. That guy's an idiot, you know. But yeah, I was that concerned. But it's true. You're like, I bought that thing, that version of it, because of freaking Tom, dude. Like, I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
And that's an embarrassing thing to admit. So therapists, my wife is a therapist, they help you see. They can't make you feel and face it fully or own it or feel it. You gotta do that for yourself, but they have tools to help you see. Enneagram. So there's tools, there's people. Ask a friend, hey, what do you see in me that gets in the way of me being authentic? Sometimes when you're around people, I see you performing a lot. You're like, that's enough. I'm done here. Like, I don't want, but there's tools and community and stuff like Enneagram therapy, because it's a weird dynamic of being human, but we're very invested in not seeing the truth of what's really going on within us.
Yes. Wow. That's pretty deep.
Lori, you would never struggle with that because you're great, but other people.
Oh, no. My ego and my flesh creeps in horrible ways as well. So someone asked a question here around how do we as denominational entities or church planting institutions help facilitate that emotional or psychological sustainability for planters. I'd like maybe for you to answer it that way, as well as how do leaders help build this competency or these practices within the, the congregation, as well.
Well, one, I mean, I see Dan or other people sometimes talking about, what the process is when denominations or planting institutions are bringing people on. I'm very far removed from those things. I don't really know exactly, but I can imagine. So it's what makes a good planner? What will make them successful? And you discover it's actually just a lot of really a big ego strength stuff. Can they build this? Can they do that? And there is the apostolic energy. Can you build things? That's all important. But what percentage of this is just a thing for leaders and denominations or whatever to think about. When you look at an assessment or the criteria you gauge whether or not you want to invest in somebody, what criteria is how well can they build things? How much of the criteria is tell me about 5 of the biggest times you learned how to forgive people. Tell me about when you get hurt, what do you do with that? Tell me about how, when it comes to self-awareness, what do you think are some of the biggest barriers towards you trusting God? Because what you're essentially talking about is what familiarity do you have with your inner life?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your spiritual practices. Tell me about how deeply you know God. Let's talk about some anxiety. Let's talk about some compulsion stuff, because this is all the fruit. This is all the things about not what a person can do, but who a person is and their depth. So if you negate that part, you're going to have people who can maybe build things quickly, but in the end, what happens to that person 7 years later? What's their marriage like? What's their life like? What's their joy like? So to me, I know you guys have had Aaron Niequist on here before, but that's why so much of you see when people in the West talk about this next big step of Christianity, however they put it, Aaron Niequist, it's moving towards practice-based stuff. Or what I'm talking about is it's moving just from beliefs to experience and knowing for yourself. This is all the fact that people are realizing it's not just what you can think and what you do, but it's a deeper experiential, how much does this person know God? I know a lot of pastors who are very much more gifted than me in a lot of pastoral organizational things, but I'm they don't really know God. And it's not a judgment. I'm because you wouldn't be that manipulative. You wouldn't need that much control. You wouldn't need that much power. You wouldn't be shaming people if you trusted you were enough. You wouldn't be doing that. You know what I'm saying? That's not a judgment. It's just that's the fruit of a person who's not living in that space.
Absolutely.
So I think having a lens to think about what are ways we can gauge the depths of a person's life with God aside from what they're familiar with or what they can build.
Yes. Kevin, what you walked us through is just so powerful. And I think without the practices that you shared with us and being aware, we have the potential of leaving a lot of more people hurt rather than healed, including ourselves. And so thank you so much for leading us in this.